The haftara for the Parsha of Bo is taken from the Novi Yirmiyahu and describes the destruction of the Egyptian Empire at the time of Yirmiyahu by the great king Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Bavel. And Nebuchadnezzar is the same king that lays waste the land of Judah and destroys the temple in Jerusalem and takes the kingdom of Judah into exile. But the strategic situation of the time was that Bavel was the northern kingdom and Egypt was the southern kingdom, and they were counterbalanced one against each other. And in the middle was Judah. In the middle was the land of Israel. And they made the mistake, among the many mistakes, but one of the mistakes they made was that they bet on the wrong horse. They were allied with Egypt. And Nebuchadnezzar, in fact, they counted that Egypt would come to save them till the last moment. And over Yirmiyahu, throughout his entire ministry, always warned them not to believe in alliances with Egypt, not to trust on themselves. And he said that Egypt is nothing more than a kaneh ratzutz, a broken reed that cannot support any weight. The moment when the crunch comes, they won't be there. And that's what happened here, is that Egypt is destroyed by Bavel. And when Egypt is destroyed, so then the fate of Judea is sealed. This is the prophecy and the haftara for the Parsha of Bo, because it parallels the destruction of Egypt at the time of the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt. Egypt has been destroyed many times in its history as an empire, and a new crop of people keep on coming to resurrect it. Hadavor asher diber Hashem el Yirmiyahu hanavi. This is the word that God spoke to the prophet Yirmiyahu. Lavo Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel, to describe the coming. Lavo means regarding the coming of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Bavel. So in Yirmiyahu, sometimes he's called Nebuchadnezzar, and sometimes he's called Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is many Meforshim feel that it's like a slang term. Jews always do that to their enemies, sometimes even to their friends. They don't call them by their right name. It's either a term of enmity or a term of belittling. But he's called here Nebuchadnezzar. Lahakosas Eretz Mitzrayim. After, in the year 567, before the Common Era, Nebuchadnezzar is triumphant over all of his enemies. And he rules the entire Middle East. So he destroys the land of Egypt. And this was after already the Jewish people, Nebuchadnezzar had conquered the Jewish people. Now Egypt is swept off the map. So there are two purposes to this prophecy. One purpose is not to believe in Egypt. The second purpose is to believe in God. And strange as it may seem, both purposes are hard to accomplish, because the nature of human beings is that they trust in man more than they trust in God, and even when they are disappointed, they trust all over again. The nature of the human race is to be, in spite of all suspicions, is to be naive. And that is why we like to make treaties and have them signed and all sorts of safeguards, etc. And many times, unfortunately, they are not worth the paper that they're printed on, because they don't have any lasting means of enforcement except the goodwill of the parties. And since people are only here for a relatively short period of time, the goodwill of the parties is not lasting either. The frightening thing. But in the history of diplomacy, I think somebody did a paper on it. No treaty has ever lasted more than, I think, 36 or 38 years, which gives one pause. And you have all the fanfare, they see Gorbachev comes and they signed a treaty and it's going to be ratified, and they're arguing, should they, shouldn't they, and in reality it really does not mean that much. But to each generation it means a great deal, because they feel they've accomplished something. It's a milestone, it's a historic event, it's going to guarantee. Nothing guarantees, because the nature of human beings is such that all the problems come up again. Hagiru b'Mitzrayim v'ashmiu b'Migdol. Spread the news throughout Egypt. Migdol is the name of a place in Egypt, the tower. Apparently Egypt had many great cities: Memphis, Thebes, Fayum, which was Cairo, Luxor, what later became Alexandria. In all of those cities, there were great architectural wonders. The Egyptians were great builders. So there was one city apparently that had a great tower. And in that tower, the city itself was called Migdol, after the tower. V'hashmiu b'Nof u'v'sach ban-ches. Nof is the city of Memphis, also spelled with a mem, Mof, which is Memphis, and not Tennessee, but Egypt. And Sach ban-ches is the city that's called Thebes, which later also became a Greek city. So these were famous cities in Egypt, and they were well-known tourist attractions. People came to visit from all over the world, just as they do today. Imru announced in the cities as follows: Yisyatse. Yisyatse means stand at attention, mobilize, get ready. V'hochein lochem, prepare yourselves. Yochlo cherev svivecha, because the sword has already eaten all of your neighbors. Don't live in a fool's paradise, Egypt, to think that somehow Nebuchadnezzar is going to let you pass. Having destroyed all of your neighbors, having conquered everyone else, so now it's your turn. But that also is a human trait, to feel that somehow it's not going to happen to me, or it's not going to happen to us, and we're not next in line. And we see that in all smaller countries, especially that deal with empires, is that they feel somehow they'll be able to weather the storm. Rarely, if ever, are they able to. But it's true of great countries as well, large empires such as Egypt. Egypt is looking to avoid the conflict with Nebuchadnezzar. Egypt is not at all certain that it will win the war. It's not looking for the war. And the war that it does not want is coming upon it. Now that's the difference between this destruction of Egypt and the destruction of Egypt at the time of the Exodus, when Jewish people were there. Because there Egypt asked for it. Egypt searched for it. Even after the plague of the firstborn and the Jews escaped, he ran after them again. He mobilized the army and he went after them again. So it's like if you ask for it, you get it. Here, they're not looking for it. They have a great dream of empire, and they have a great tradition of empire, but they're not really looking to fight Bogo. They're not looking to fight Nebuchadnezzar. He has a fearsome reputation. He has a tremendous army. It's not going to be a simple matter for them, and they're aware of it. But the war comes upon them. Madua nischaf abirecha, famous passage. The Navi stands back in awe, and he himself says, how could it happen, abirecha, your strong men, your heroes, your finest troops, nischaf, were swept away, like blown away like the wind blows chaff, just swept away by the war. How could that be? Lo Amad, how could it be that you couldn't stand? You couldn't make a stand. You couldn't make a defense line anywhere. How could that be? So the Navi has one answer. Ki Hashem hadafo. God pushed you. Here the Navi reveals a message that he uses many times. The Talmud tells us that the city of Jerusalem was so well fortified in the first temple that there was no army that could prevail over it. When the army of Sancherib, the king of Ashur, came and besieged it at the time of the king Chizkiyahu, in about 700 before the Common Era, Sancherib's army was unable to press home the siege. They were unable to mount the wall. It was just, the defenses were just so enormous. But the Talmud tells us that when the time came, the army of Nebuchadnezzar used a broomstick and pushed in the door, pushed in the gate. The metaphor is that when God wants it to happen, so then either you're triumphant or victorious or defeated and laid low. And it really doesn't matter what you do anymore, because your time has come, so to speak. And that's what happens to Egypt. He says, how could it be the great Egyptian army, the heroes of the world, the strong men of the world, lo Amad, didn't stand, didn't make them while fighting stand against Nebuchadnezzar? What happened there? Ki Hashem hadafo. God pushed them. God is the one that did them in. Here bo koshel. Tremendous verse. There were a lot of people that tripped over each other. He describes what we could say is the domino effect of the defeat. One guy tripped and everybody tripped over him. One guy slipped, everybody slipped over him. The failure of one point on the line is sufficient to bring about the disaster of defeat. Yam nofal ish el re'ehu. One man fell upon his friend, and upon the next soldier. Just piled up. Vayomru, and therefore they said to themselves, Kuma, let's get up and run away. Which is the reaction, the panic reaction. Because in the chaos of this organization, soldiers slipping and sliding and falling. So those in the rear said, well, I'm not going ahead. I have no intention to stand here. Kuma, let us get up in Oshuva. Let's go home. El Ameinu vel Eretz Moladeteinu. To our home, to our birthplace. Because Egypt fought its wars with, much as the British fought later, with troops of the empire. So they had Ethiopians and Pythians, and they had Libyans and Arabs, and everybody was in their army. Well, when it started going bad, everybody said, I'm going home, right? I'm not going to kill myself for the Egyptians. Always the problem of a multinational force is that it's only effective if you're winning. If you're not winning, then it's just, you can't mount a good retreat with it. Because the natural tendency then is to break into their own ethnic or national group and flee. Mipnei cherev hayona. The word Yona is a word that means the sword of destruction, the sword that oppresses, the sword that exploits. It's like from the Hebrew word onoon, which means to exploit someone. To cheat someone in business, you exploit someone's labor, you are destructive of the other person. So that's cherev hayona. But it has an imagery to it. Yona is also a bird. It's the sword that flies at us, right? It's like a bird. It's here before we know it. There's no way to stop it. It has an image to it. Korushom, they called out there. The Egyptian soldiers there on the field of battle. And they said, Paro Melech Mitzrayim Sho'om. Paro, the king of Egypt, it's all noise. There's no substance, it's all noise. Which a great deal of war was. I don't know if that's true any longer, but it was pomp and noise and psychological warfare and music and trumpets and uniforms. But it wasn't substance, right? Is that power? The Egyptians had the best. It's like having the best military band in the world, right? But that doesn't win the war for you. It's all noise. We are lost. Havir Amoed, but his time is past. He missed the moment, Paro. So, what do they say, that all of life is timing? Well, that's true in war also. He's too late. We're too little and too late. We're not going to be able to win now. So you hear the complaints of the soldiers, how downtrodden they feel, how pessimistic they are. If there's no morale, then there's no hope of victory, no hope at all. Chayoni nu'um ha'melech, Hashem tzvoko shmo. Now that's the expression that is always used in Tanakh for an oath, so to speak, by the Ribono Shel Olam, by God. Chayoni, because I am eternal, because I am alive, so therefore man can never take an oath, because man never knows when his time elapses. And therefore we can make commitments and promises and write things down in our diary and put them up on the calendar, but we are, to a certain extent, whistling in the dark. We hope that God will help us and we'll make it, but it's no guarantee. And therefore all oaths and promises that man makes are inherently not false, but they're inherently flawed, because they have within themselves the capability of never being fulfilled. Whereas Ribono Shel Olam, who is Chayoni, Ribono Shel Olam, who lives forever, if that word can even be used, but God is beyond time, so therefore anything that God says is reliable, steadfast, can be trusted. It's always there. It never need be doubted. That's the idea of chayoni, that I am alive. I'm the only one. Such a famous pasuk here. Ki kesovor behorim, just as the mountain of Tabor is unique among the mountains of Israel. So those of you who've been in the Galilee near Megiddo, and you see the mountain of Tabor, the mountain where Dvorah and Barak fought the battle against Sisera. So the mountain of Tabor is a perfectly round mountain. It's one of the few mountains. Most of the mountains that we see in the world are jagged. Tabor is a perfectly round mountain that comes to a peak, and it is set off from all the other mountains around it. It sits like in the middle of a valley, and it is a unique mountain, just as there is no other mountain like the mountain of Tabor, just as certainly as the mountain of Tabor stands fast and strong and eternal. Uchecharmel bayom yavo, and as the mountain of Carmel comes into the sea, by the city of Haifa. The city of Haifa is built on the mountain of Carmel. And it tapers down to the sea. The mountain runs into the sea. Well, you have the same expression of nature that exists, for instance, in many parts of the Pacific California coast, where the mountains run into the sea, the Pacific Palisades, or Big Sur, Monterey, or near San Francisco. That's the imagery here. And the mountain of Carmel flows into the sea. It falls into the sea. So the Navi says, as surely as those things do not change, as surely as Har Tabor will always be the mountain in the Galilee, and as surely as the Carmel, in all of its beauty, runs into the sea, so too is the destruction of Egypt assured. You can rely on it. You can count on it. Though Egypt will not make a comeback. Egypt is gone. But this metaphor, ki kesavor behorim uchecharmel bayom yavo, is one of the most famous metaphors in Tanakh. Next time you're in Israel and you see it, so I'm sure you remember the pasuk. Klei gola asiloch, Yosheves bas Mitzrayim. The daughter of Mitzrayim, so the Navi mocks them. Bas Mitzrayim, the daughter of Egypt, so they were haughty people, right? Rich, spoiled girls. Everything always went their way. They were wealthy. They were pampered. They had everything. But the Navi says, go out and buy a new wardrobe for yourself. The wardrobe of the exile. Klei gola asiloch. Make for yourself now, you're going to need a new wardrobe. You're going to need new clothes. Become accustomed to the fact that you're going to have clothes that are the clothes of exile. And his mockery, the Navi has here a jaded irony to him, is because, like you buy clothes for the party, right, or for the vacation, or for, you have to have your wardrobe ready. So he says, you have to have this, get ready, come and take you. So they're not going to wait for you. You can't be late. So now's the time to get it ready. Kinof Lishamasi, the great city of Memphis, the great city that was the linchpin of Egypt between the north and the south on the Nile River. The main city of commerce and of trade now will be desolate. The Shama, will be absolutely desolate, destroyed. The nitzusah, and it will be burned to the ground, destroyed. Me'ein yoshev, and there will not remain any inhabitants. The city will be sacked. And when no falls, then Egypt is done. Egypt is done. Eglo yefeifiya Mitzrayim. The Navi describes Egypt. He says, Egypt is a beautiful calf that has, like the farmer sees potential in the calf, right? It can be everything that he wants it to be. But Keretz mitzofon bo. But what is going to cut down the calf, what's going to shech the calf, it's going to slaughter it, bo is certainly coming. That the repetition means certainly. It's inexorably coming. It's on the way. It's like a lava flow down the side of the volcano. Can't be reversed. Mitzofon, it comes from the north, meaning from Babylonia. Look, it's coming. Bo, here it is. It's right here. It's at your doorstep. You have to realize that the Navi himself is an eyewitness to these events, because the Navi Yirmiyahu escaped to Egypt. Most of the Jews went to Babylonia. 90% of the Jews at the time of the destruction of the first temple went to Babylonia, but about 10% went to Egypt. They founded the great Jewish community of Alexandria and other cities in Egypt. And the Jews were present for this destruction. When the Egyptians were destroyed, it was as though Nebuchadnezzar pursued them even further. The word keretz is a very difficult word. Unfortunately, say it's the only time it appears in all of Tanakh. So when a word appears only once, you have to piece together the meaning, because you have no place to compare it to. And most of the Meforshim explain that it means to shech, to slaughter. And that's the imagery that's used with the calf. Just as the calf is led to slaughter, so too the Egyptian army annihilated. Gam schireho bekirbo ke'egle marbek. Schireho are its mercenaries. The Egyptian empire was built, as we mentioned before, on foreign troops, because the Egyptians didn't want to go fight, so they hired people to go fight, which is also what in the United States we call euphemistically an all-volunteer army. That we have an all-volunteer army, so the level of intelligence and the level of ability is usually very low. So here also, they hired people, they hired people to go fight for them. Well, the people who they hired to go fight for them didn't do a good job. Gam schireho, those that were hired, bekirba, ke'egle marbek, they also are like fatted calves, meaning, they're not hard and lean to fight. They're also spoiled. They're also accustomed to the good life. They're like calves that are prancing in the pasture. And therefore, there is no wonder, the Navi says, Gam heima hifnu, they also turned around when they saw the enemy. So they made an about face. Nosu yachtov, together they fled. Panicked and fled. Lo amadu, they made no stand. They couldn't withstand the pressure of the enemy. But he says it's not their fault. Ki yom Edom bo aleim. The day of reckoning, the day of destruction has come. That day they are powerless. Eis pekudosom, the time, the appointed time for their visitation. The appointed time for their punishment is here. And when it's here, so then they're destroyed. They cannot withstand God's will. And Egypt will be destroyed. But he mocks the mercenaries here. He mocks the whole idea of mercenaries, hiring people to fight, which has been an idea that always exists within man. And being a mercenary, a gun for hire, is an honorable profession in the Western world. It has a romance to it. But very rarely are mercenaries any good. Because they're there to collect the check, but they don't want to get bumped off. They don't want to get killed. They're not fighting for an ideal. And therefore the Egyptian army reels in panic in front of the Babylonians. Kola kanochosh yelech. So there are two interpretations. One interpretation is the army of Nebuchadnezzar makes a hissing sound like a snake that's moving, or like a rattler that's going to strike. So meaning that the snake always gives warning. If you listen, the snake always gives warning. But usually there's very little the victim can do to escape. That's one interpretation. The second interpretation is Kol HaKanocha She'elech refers to the sound of the Egyptian army. The Egyptian army is now like a snake, meaning they're down to a hiss. Where, all noise and fire and enthusiasm and proclamations and brass bands, and now they're down to a hiss, to a slither in the ground. Ki v'chayil yelechu. Because the army of the Chaldeans, the army of the Babylonians are coming in enormous strength. Chayil is strength. Chayil also means wealth. Usually the two go together. The strength of an army oftentimes is its wealth, that it has all of the resources it needs, all the equipment, all the reserves. It has everything it needs. Uvekardumos ba'ulah. They have come against the Egyptians with, kardumos are axes, kichot ve'etzim, as though they were lumberjacks. So here, there are three or four ideas that are going on here at once in the Navi. First of all, he describes a new secret weapon which the Babylonian army perfected, and that was the battle axe, which was not revived again until the Middle Ages. But you have to have tremendous physical strength to wield the battle axe. In the Tower of London, they have a room with Henry VIII's armor in it. Poor Henry's not there, but his armor, he wasn't such a tall man, though for his time he was a big man. And they have the instruments of warfare, so they have there a battle axe. And they always, they say, all right, pick it up. You can't move the thing, let alone swing it. I mean, the man had to be a weightlifter, a hammer thrower, an Olympic strength wrestling champion to be able to move that thing, to pick it up. But if he could pick it up and lay a blow on somebody, he didn't need a second blow. Absolutely lethal. And the battle axe was so strong that it cut through all armor, no matter in the ancient world and in the medieval world. The soldiers wore armor to protect themselves. So gunpowder really put away armor. So there still is armor today. There are bulletproof vests, flak vests, etc., that soldiers wear, that the police wear. Many times you read about a person that he was saved by the bullet struck the bulletproof vest and it saved it. I know a manufacturer in Florida, a friend, a member of my shul, so he manufactures the vests, and he also manufactures the bullets. I once asked him, well, whose side is he on? Right? So he says the technology of both improves. They invent an armor-piercing bullet, so then they invent another way to get a bulletproof vest, and they invent the next bullet that'll go through that vest, etc. That's what keeps them in business, because all the old vests become obsolete every year, and all the old bullets become obsolete every year. But the battle axe was a tremendous weapon. So the Babylonians are the ones that introduced it. And the Novi describes them as like lumberjacks that are coming to cut down the forest, except the forest here is the Egyptian army. The Egyptian army is going to be hewn. It's going to be cut down, literally destroyed, hacked to pieces. Korsu Yara Num Hashem. God said they will cut down your forest. So that happened literally also. Not just they cut down the army, they cut down the forest. They denuded the country. That always was a sign of conquest. That the country was left barren. So first of all, they needed the trees for their own purposes, to make shelter and to fire, etc. In the First World War, there was one of the few forests. It wasn't even a forest. It was a grove of trees that existed not far from Netanya. That grove of trees is mentioned in Josephus. And those trees survived everything for 1900 years. And then the Turkish army chopped them down to build defenses against the British in 1917. It didn't help them anyway, but the trees were gone. Trees that had existed for such a long period of time. So here, when the Novi says, Korsu Yara, they have cut down your forest, so the metaphor is they've cut down your army. Your army is destroyed. But the idea behind it is more than the army. They've denuded your country of vegetation. They've cut down your forest. They'll leave you with nothing. Kilo yechoker. 3 explanations here. Each one has its own strength to it. Kilo yechoker meaning that it cannot be counted. It has no count. The destruction is so enormous that there's no count of casualties. There's no count of the trees. There's just no count. Can't be counted. The second explanation is Kilo Yechoker, the victorious army is not usually subject to investigations. They'll do what they want, Kilo Yechoker. They will not be investigated. They will not be held accountable for their behavior. And the third idea, Kilo Yechoker, is because no one is thinking. Why are you cutting down the trees? You're going to need the trees too. But the anger, the fury of war, the fury of the moment is to destroy. So the destruction is so second nature in war that even though it's self-inimical to the conquering forces, they do it anyway. Counterproductive. So that's Kilo Yechoker, no one is thinking. Kirabu me'arbe. The Chaldeans, the Babylonians, are more than a plague of locusts. Anyone who has ever had the good fortune of seeing a plague of locusts, I once saw it in fact, we drove through them in Kansas. It was just one of the most frightening things. I mean, you could hear the crunch in the car. It was just, trillions of them. Just a swarm of it. But it was very narrow. They were flying at like 100 feet wide. So you have to get through that 100 feet. But you just couldn't believe it. So he says they're more numerous than the locusts. Ve'ein lahem mispor. There is no number. There's no number that can contain them, that can describe them, that they can be counted by. So this is hyperbole. The Babylonian army was not 1,000,000 men. And even 1,000,000 has a number. But he means in terms of the Egyptians, as they saw them as being a host without end, no number, unable to be controlled. So here also we see the strategy of war, the psychology of war. You have to make yourself appear more numerous than you are. In the ancient world, they were experts at it, marching and soldiers back and forth, etc. The Israelis did the same thing in the 1948 Israel War of Independence. They had 2 jeeps in Jerusalem, so they drove them back and forth all night so that the Arabs thought, who knows how many jeeps. They had column upon column, keep on coming. The same 2 jeeps over and over again. But it gave an impression as though there were many. And in life, image becomes substance. After a while, the image is the substance. Hovisha Bas Mitzrayim. Bas Mitzrayim, again, the daughter of Egypt. Hovisha is shamed in front of the entire world. Been exposed. Word busha. Been exposed. Until now everybody said, oh, Egypt, the Egyptian army, the Egyptian empire, oh, Egypt. And all of a sudden Egypt is nothing. What happened to France in the Second World War, which is something that still is deeply embedded in the French national psyche. That's why they're such not nice people. Terrible complex over what happened. So here, the daughter of Mitzrayim, the proud, haughty, arrogant, wealthy daughter of Mitzrayim is now embarrassed beyond words, has been exposed, been shown up to be all bluff. Nitna bi'aram tzofon, given over in the hands of the peoples of the north. So again, you have to understand the imagery, the peoples of the north, that was an insult. The Egyptians held that anybody that lived north of them was a barbarian, was uncouth, uncivilized. Civilization lay in the Nile Valley. And anywhere else just didn't count to them. And here they're given over in the hands the Yad Am Tzofon, people of the north. So if they would be given over in the hands of their ancient enemies in the south, Egypt always had wars from the south, from Africa, and they always had wars from the west, from Libya. So that they could come to terms with. It depends who you lose to also, right? You lose the game to the last place team, or to somebody whom you have treated very lightly, so then the defeat is that more galling. And here, that's the Navi says, Nitna bi'ad am tzofon. No, they're given over in the hands of the northerners. People from the north whom they not only didn't respect, but they didn't feel they're barbarians. Omar Hashem Tzvokos Elokei Yisrael, thus says the Lord God of Israel. This is the peroration of the Navi Yirmiyah. Hineni Foked El Omon Mino. Amen Meno is the name of Alamon. That's the city that's in the pantheon of the gods of Egypt. This is like the top god, the top temple. We have the name of the pharaoh Amenhotep. That's the same name. And that was the god, and it was the sun god that they worshiped. And they named the temple. So God said, I am going to visit meaning to visit destruction, to visit punishment upon this great temple of the sun god, which was the symbol of Egypt. Ve'al Paro, ve'al Mitzrayim, and against the Pharaoh, and against Egypt. So the Navi points out to us what he's going to say explicitly in a moment, that God first punishes the god of the Egyptians, and then the king of the Egyptians, and then the people. So here also, Al Eloheho ve'al Melocheho. I have come to visit my punishment, Al Eloheho, on its gods, Al Melocheho, and on its kings. Al Paro, against the Pharaoh, of Al Abot Chimbo, and upon all of those who trust in him, who are his allies, who look to him for salvation, who are convinced somehow that he can help them. The idea of the Pharaoh, the Egyptian Pharaoh, as I've mentioned to you numerous times, was a god. He was not human. He was a god. He was a super person. And therefore, it's like the Japanese with the emperor. We don't realize the tremendous step that General MacArthur made the Japanese take. He took a god and he made him human. He stopped the deification of the emperor. And to a great extent it has worked, because the emperor has let it work. But they worshipped him as an emperor, but they worshipped him as a god. And that's a completely, it's an alien idea to us. We don't even think of our leaders as being human beings, let alone God. And sometimes we even resent, but that's a part of the picture. People don't want to be ruled by other humans. And therefore, if he's the ruler, he has to be the God. The divine right of kings, which existed in the Western world for so many centuries, is part of that psychology. Well, if he's not a god, at least God made him the king. But he can't be the same schnook that I am, which they all are, right? Prince Charles and the rest of them, But it's hard to accept that. And people don't want that. And that's why people are unfailingly non-forgiving to leaders who have human foibles. And when it's exposed, then the people are unforgiving. And simply because of the fact that that's why we love to hear all the scandals and pick the leaders apart, because we don't want to be governed by ordinary human beings. We don't like that. The only people who like that are the Jews, and they destroy anybody anyway. Unesatim biyad mevakshe nafshom. I shall hand them over, God says. And I shall hand over the Egyptian army, the pharaohs, the officers, the leaders. They will all be handed over to those who are looking to kill them. They're not going into a nice rest camp. The people who catch them, the people who are after them, are mevakshe nafsham, are out to destroy them. V'yad Nebuchadrezzar melech Bovel, I'm handing them over into the hands of Nebuchadrezzar, the king of Bovel, who is well known in the ancient world for his cruelty, for the fact that he grants no mercy, for the fact that he's an evil person. Uviyad avodov, and in the hands of his servants. So the king, if the king is a sadist, then the ones who work for him are. I mean, that's the kind of people he's looking for. So then the Navi says they'll be turned over, handed over to them. And then there will come a time, the Navi ends very strangely. Tishkon kimei kedem num Hashem. Then Egypt will come. There'll come a time when Egypt will have peace. Egypt will have tranquility. It will be great, and it will rest as it did in days of yore, says God. Here the Navi introduces us again to another Jewish concept, and that is that we have a partnership with Egypt. And that Egypt is with us till the end. Just like Egypt was with us in the beginning, Egypt is with us in the end. There will always be 3-day tours from Jerusalem to the pyramids. Egypt has a role to play. It's not one of the countries that is destined to disappear, that civilization will wipe off the map, but that it will remain. And Forsham explained part of it is because of the fact that Egypt was our home for so many centuries. And part of it is because of Moses, and Moses' mother, Batya, the daughter of Paro. God somehow has a reckoning, an accounting, a different system of relationships with Egypt. So after this long and terrible description of the destruction of Egypt, when the Navi leaves them no hope, the last 5 words of his prophecy are, but don't worry, this will all blow over. After all of this happens, Tishkon Kimei Kedem. There will come a time when it will be restored to its former greatness. Now the Navi concludes, if that's true regarding Egypt, how much more so regarding the Jewish people? If Egypt being destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar is not destroyed permanently, if Egypt's punishment is in historic terms only a temporary setback, in the long run of history Egypt will still be there, well then how much more rather can we say regarding the people of Israel, regarding the Jewish state and the Jewish people, that they will be V'ato you al tira avdi Yaakov. Don't be afraid, my servant Jacob. You, the Jewish people, don't tremble. Don't be afraid of the future. V'al teichas Yisrael, and let not Israel tremble. Let not Israel quake. Let them not lose their nerve. Because this really is a test of nerve. The exile, the survival of the Jewish people is, in blunt terms, just a test of wills, of nerve. Who's going to blink first? Al teichas Yisrael. Ki hineni Moshiacho meirochok. God says, I am coming to save you meirochok, from afar. So there are 3 different interpretations here from afar. From afar meaning that you don't even realize that I'm there to help you. Miraculously you will be saved from afar without even understanding and realizing what's happening to you. You'll be saved. The second interpretation, Meirachok, is that even though you are far from me, even though you're not the people that you're supposed to be, even though you have not lived up to the covenant, I will save you anyway. Meirachok. It's like somebody has a relative, right, that has disappointed him time and time again, but it's still his relative. It's still flesh and blood. He's got to help you. The Rabboni Shalom Kaviyachal is stuck with us. The third understanding of the word Merochok is that God helps us, but it is not seen in a direct fashion. It's all series of indirect and almost circumstantial happenstance events. And yet when it's all done, it's all put together, here it is. Salvation is here. Vezarachom eretz shivyom, and I shall save your children in the lands of their captivity. Meaning I will save them as Jews, and I shall return them to their homeland. The Navi uses the phrase Eretz Shivyom, the land of their captivity, not the land of their exile. There's a difference, there's a nuance of difference. Person that's in the land of his captivity, so he's always a captive. He always has a feeling that he doesn't belong. Whereas a person that comes to a strange country that's an alien, so he attempts to belong. Eventually he convinces himself that he does belong. The Shah of Yaakov, Israel will return. Return to its homeland, return to its faith, return to its God. All of that is included in the Shah. Tshuva will be complete. V'shokat v'shanan, and it will be quiet and tranquil, v'ein macharid, and no one will make threats, no terror, no fright. We're still a little away from the realization of that great pasuk. Ato al tira avdi Yaakov num Hashem ki yitcha ani. The Navi concludes, you, my servant Jacob, again, don't be frightened. The main thing is not to be frightened. Don't lose heart. Don't lose nerve. Ki itcha ani, I am with you. You're not alone. The Jew has to feel that in his or her personal life, and the Jewish people have to feel that in their national life. That no matter what happens to us, and God forbid terrible things have happened, we're still not alone. I shall destroy yet all of the nations that you have been pushed there. All the places where you lived in the world, they will taste the cup of destruction. They'll become extinct. Their civilizations will disappear. They have no guarantee of eternity. Their empires are only temporary. But you I will not destroy. You will not be destroyed. Guarantees that what? That the Jewish people will survive. That's again, the prophecy here is a prophecy that is repeated over and over again in the Tanakh. V'yisarticho lamishpat, and I shall judge you. I will punish you in justice, in judgment. You will not escape free. You also will be judged, but you will not be destroyed. You'll survive. That's one of God's eternal promises, that the Jewish people will survive. Enakei lo anakeko, and I will not whitewash you. I will not clean you free, but you'll have to pay for it. No free lunch. But nevertheless, you will eventually come to redemption. You will eventually come to peace and tranquility. Others say that the interpretation v'nakelo anakeko is again that I will not destroy you. You won't be swept clean off the boards the way the nations of the world are. You will not disappear, but that you will remain and be triumphant and be successful, and that Jewish people are the eternal people. That's the promise that the Navi gives us. Right?